This ticket is fake, and you know it.
The words sliced through the first-class cabin like a blade, sharp and unforgiving. Samantha Rodriguez didn't whisper the accusation. She announced it loud enough for every passenger within earshot to hear her voice dripping with authority and contempt. In her perfectly pressed Phoenix Airways uniform, she stood over the young black woman in seat 2A like a judge delivering a verdict. The cabin fell silent except for the low hum of the aircraft's engines. Passengers stopped their conversations mid-sentence, heads turning toward the confrontation unfolding just rows away. The tension was thick enough to choke on. What happened next would destroy careers, change an entire airline, and prove that sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one you'd least expect. But before we dive into this incredible story of justice, dignity, and consequences, I want to know where you're watching from. Drop your city in the comments below. And if you believe that every passenger deserves respect, regardless of how they look, hit that subscribe button because this story is about to get intense. Now, let me take you back to where it all began, 30,000 feet above the ground, where a torn piece of paper would tear down a culture of discrimination that had been hiding in plain sight for years. Jasmine Thompson sat perfectly still in her first-class seat, her hands folded in her lap, her breathing steady, despite the accusation hanging in the air above her like a storm cloud. She was 20 years old, a junior at Howard University studying aerospace engineering, and she had paid for this seat with money saved from her summer internship. She wore a vintage band t-shirt, comfortable jeans, and sneakers that had seen better days. To most people, she looked like any other college student flying home for the holidays. To Samantha Rodriguez, she looked like a problem that needed solving. Samantha had been a flight attendant for 8 years, and in her mind, she had developed an eye for trouble. She prided herself on maintaining what she called standards in the first-class cabin. She believed she could spot passengers who didn't belong, people who had somehow acquired tickets they couldn't afford through questionable means. She was wrong about a lot of things, but she was about to be proven catastrophically wrong about Jasmine Thompson. The other passengers watched the scene unfold with growing discomfort. Robert Mitchell, a businessman in 4A, slowly reached for his phone. Jennifer Walsh, a civil rights attorney in 3B, sat forward in her seat, her legal instincts already triggered. An elderly Korean-American couple, Harold and Dorothy Kim, exchanged worried glances from across the aisle. None of them knew they were about to witness a moment that would go viral, spark nationwide conversations about discrimination, and ultimately transform how an entire industry treats its customers. They had no idea that the quiet young woman being accused of fraud was about to teach them all a lesson about the power of dignity in the face of prejudice. And Samantha Rodriguez. She had absolutely no clue that she was about to destroy her own career by targeting the daughter of the man who signed her paychecks. 3 hours earlier, Jasmine Thompson had walked through the bustling corridors of Miami International Airport with the quiet confidence of someone who belonged exactly where she was. She carried a worn backpack over one shoulder and a tablet case in her hand, moving with purpose toward Gate A12. Her destination was Atlanta, where her father was celebrating his 51st birthday. What he didn't know was that his daughter was coming home early to surprise him. Jasmine had always been the type of person who preferred to blend into the background. At Howard University, where she was studying aerospace engineering, her professors knew her as the quiet student who asked thoughtful questions and turned in flawless assignments. Her classmates respected her intellect, but often forgot she was in the room until she spoke up with an insight that changed the entire direction of a discussion. She had grown up understanding that the world would often underestimate her. Her father had taught her from a young age that her response to that underestimation would define her character. Dignity is not something they can take from you, he had told her when she was 12, and facing her first real encounter with prejudice at school. They can try, but only you can choose to give it away. Today, that lesson would be tested in ways she never imagined. Behind the gate counter, Samantha Rodriguez was having the worst week of her career. At 29, she had been with Phoenix Airways for 8 years. working her way up from domestic routes to international flights. She had always dreamed of becoming a supervisor, maybe even management someday. But last Monday, she had been passed over for promotion again, and the rejection stung more than she cared to admit. The position had gone to Carlos Hernandez, a gate agent with 3 fewer years of experience but a natural warmth with passengers that Samantha had never quite mastered. She had watched him effortlessly defuse tense situations with a smile and genuine concern for travelers' needs. It was a skill she wished she possessed, but instead she had developed a different reputation, the enforcer, the one who made sure rules were followed and standards maintained. Samantha had grown up in Miami, the daughter of immigrant parents who had worked multiple jobs to provide for their family. She understood struggle and sacrifice, which made her even more suspicious of passengers who seemed to have access to luxuries they couldn't possibly afford. In her experience, people tried to game the airlines every day using fake upgrades, counterfeit tickets, or elaborate schemes to access services they hadn't paid for. She believed she was protecting the company's interests. She had no idea she was about to become the face of everything wrong with it. Gate A12 was buzzing with the controlled chaos of holiday travel. Phoenix Airways Flight 447 was a popular route connecting Miami's vibrant Latin American business community with Atlanta's thriving corporate scene. The Boeing 777-300 could carry 347 passengers, and today it was completely sold out. The first-class cabin held 16 seats each, priced at over $2,000 for the 3-hour flight. As passengers began gathering for the boarding process, Samantha surveyed the gate area with the practiced eye of someone who had seen every type of traveler imaginable. She noted the usual suspects, business executives in expensive suits checking their phones constantly, wealthy retirees dressed in designer casual wear, and a handful of younger passengers who might be traveling on corporate accounts or family money. Then her gaze landed on Jasmine Thompson, sitting quietly in the priority boarding area, and every instinct she had developed over 8 years in the airline industry told her something was wrong. The girl was young, probably college-aged, and dressed like she was heading to class rather than sitting in a section reserved for first-class passengers. Her backpack looked like it had been through several semesters of hard use, and her tablet case was worn at the edges. She wasn't checking the time anxiously like the business travelers, wasn't dressed to impress like the wealthy passengers, and she certainly didn't have the entitled demeanor Samantha associated with people who regularly flew first class. What Samantha saw was a young woman who didn't fit her mental image of who belonged in premium seating. What she missed was the quiet strength in Jasmine's posture, the focused intelligence in her eyes, and the fact that she was reviewing aerospace engineering textbooks on her tablet while waiting to board. Captain James Sullivan, a 20-year veteran of Phoenix Airways, was conducting his pre-flight briefing with characteristic efficiency. At 49, he had flown this route hundreds of times and prided himself on running a tight ship. His crew respected him. His safety record was impeccable, and his passengers rarely complained about the service under his command. But Captain Sullivan had developed some blind spots over the years. He trusted his senior crew members to handle cabin issues, rarely questioning their judgment when they reported problems. If Samantha Rodriguez said there was a passenger causing trouble, he believed her. If she recommended removing someone from the aircraft, he backed her decision. Today, that unquestioning trust would cost him his career. In the terminal, other passengers were beginning to notice the tension building around Gate A12. Robert Mitchell, a technology consultant who flew first class several times a month, was scrolling through emails when he noticed the flight attendant staring intently at a young black woman in the priority seating area. Something about the woman's body language struck him as predatory, and he made a mental note to keep an eye on the situation. Jennifer Walsh, a civil rights attorney returning from a discrimination case in Miami, was reading legal briefs when her professional instincts kicked in. She had spent years recognizing the subtle signs of racial profiling, and what she was witnessing at Gate A12 looked familiar in all the wrong ways. Harold and Dorothy Kim married for 38 years, and seasoned travelers had lived through enough history to recognize prejudice when they saw it. Harold had been a young man when the civil rights movement was fighting for basic dignity, and Dorothy had experienced her own share of discrimination as a Korean immigrant. They watched the scene developing with growing concern. None of these passengers knew they were about to become witnesses to an incident that would expose deep-rooted problems within an airline they had trusted for years. They had no idea their testimony would later be crucial in transforming not just company policies but industry standards nationwide. As the boarding announcement echoed through the gate area, Jasmine Thompson gathered her belongings and prepared to board the aircraft that would take her home to Atlanta. She had no reason to suspect that the next few hours would test every lesson about dignity and strength her father had ever taught her. She certainly never imagined that by standing up for herself she would end up standing up for countless other passengers who had faced discrimination in silence. The boarding announcement crackled through the gate area speakers with mechanical politeness. Phoenix Airways Flight 447 to Atlanta is now boarding first-class passengers and Diamond Club members. Please approach the gate with your boarding passes ready. Jasmine Thompson gathered her backpack and tablet case, double-checking her boarding pass one final time. Seat 2, a first class. She had splurged on the upgrade using money saved from her summer internship at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center. The internship had been competitive, prestigious, and exhausting, but it had also been her first real taste of the aerospace industry she hoped to enter after graduation. As she approached the boarding lane, Jasmine noticed several well-dressed passengers falling in line ahead of her. A man in an expensive Italian suit was reviewing documents in a leather portfolio. An older woman wearing designer jewelry was speaking quietly into her phone in what sounded like German. Everyone looked like they belonged in first class, and Jasmine felt a familiar flutter of self-doubt. Her father had taught her that confidence was earned through preparation and character, not through clothing or appearances. But standing in line wearing her favorite vintage NASA t-shirt and comfortable traveling jeans, she wondered if she was underdressed for the experience ahead. That moment of uncertainty lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then, Samantha Rodriguez stepped out from behind the gate counter, her eyes fixed on Jasmine with laser focus. "Excuse me, miss." Samantha's voice carried across the gate area with unmistakable authority. Several passengers turned to look as she approached the boarding line. "Economy passengers board with Group 5. The announcement will be made shortly." Jasmine looked up, initially confused. "I'm sorry, but I'm in first class." She held up her boarding pass, the numbers clearly visible on the screen of her phone. Seat 2A. Samantha's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered behind her eyes. She stepped closer, positioning herself directly in front of Jasmine in a way that blocked her path to the gate. "May I see your identification and boarding pass, please?" The request itself wasn't unusual, but the tone carried an unmistakable edge of suspicion. Jasmine handed over her driver's license and held out her phone, displaying the digital boarding pass. She noticed that Samantha hadn't asked for identification from any of the other first-class passengers. Samantha examined the documents with exaggerated thoroughness, holding the license up to the light and squinting at the details. "This boarding pass," she said slowly, loud enough for other passengers to hear, "doesn't look right to me." "I'm sorry." Jasmine's voice remained calm, but she felt heat rising in her cheeks. "What exactly doesn't look right?" "The format seems off, and this seat assignment," Samantha shook her head. "2A is our premium seat. It's usually reserved for our most frequent flyers or special guests." Behind Jasmine, Robert Mitchell lowered his phone and started paying closer attention to the conversation. He had flown Phoenix Airways dozens of times and had never seen a flight attendant question a passenger's boarding pass so aggressively. Something about the interaction struck him as wrong. "I purchased this ticket online 3 weeks ago," Jasmine explained patiently. "I can show you the confirmation email if you'd like." "Online purchases can be problematic," Samantha replied, handing back the license but continuing to stare at the phone screen. "We see a lot of fraudulent bookings, especially for premium seats. People find ways to manipulate the airline's website, use stolen credit cards, all sorts of schemes." The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Jasmine felt the stares of other passengers boring into her back. The man in the Italian suit checked his watch impatiently. The elderly German woman had finished her phone call and was listening intently to the exchange. "Are you suggesting my ticket is fraudulent?" Jasmine's voice remained level, but anyone listening carefully would have heard the steel underneath her polite words. "I'm suggesting," Samantha said, "that maybe there's been a mistake. Sometimes the airline's website glitches, and passengers think they've purchased first-class tickets when they've actually bought economy seats. It happens more often than you'd think." Carlos Hernandez, the gate agent, who had recently been promoted over Samantha, noticed the commotion from behind the counter. He had worked with Samantha for 2 years and had seen her become increasingly rigid about enforcing what she considered proper procedures. He approached the boarding line with a diplomatic smile. "Is everything okay here?" Carlos asked, dividing his attention between Samantha and Jasmine. "Can I help resolve something?" Samantha bristled slightly at the interruption. "I'm handling a potential boarding pass issue. The passenger's ticket may not be valid." Carlos glanced at Jasmine's phone screen, then at her identification, then back at Samantha, with barely concealed confusion. "The boarding pass looks standard to me, Samantha. The seat assignment is confirmed in our system. I still think we should verify the purchase," Samantha insisted. "Young passengers sometimes use parents' credit cards without permission, or there could be a family member's account involved that needs authorization." The implication was clear, and it made Jasmine's stomach turn. She was being accused not just of fraud, but of essentially stealing her way into first class. Around her, she could feel the judgment of other passengers who were beginning to accept Samantha's narrative. "Ma'am," Carlos said gently to Jasmine, "would you mind if I just double-check something in our system? It'll only take a moment." Jasmine nodded, appreciating his respectful tone. As Carlos walked back to the counter to access the computer, she caught sight of Jennifer Walsh, the civil rights attorney who was now standing and watching the interaction with professional interest. Jennifer had seen this exact scenario play out in courtrooms across the country. A person of color trying to access a service or space they had legitimately purchased, only to face suspicion and additional scrutiny that white customers never encountered. She pulled out her own phone and began taking notes. Meanwhile, Harold and Dorothy Kim exchanged meaningful glances from their seats near the gate. Harold leaned over to his wife and whispered in Korean, "This is wrong. That young woman is being treated terribly." Dorothy nodded. She remembered similar moments from her early years in America, when shopkeepers would follow her around stores or restaurant hostesses would question whether she could afford to eat at their establishments. "Should we say something?" "We should be ready to," Harold replied. "If this gets worse, that girl is going to need witnesses." Carlos returned from the computer with a confused expression. "Everything checks out perfectly," he announced. "The ticket was purchased online 3 weeks ago with a valid credit card. Full payment processed, seat assignment confirmed, no issues whatsoever." Samantha's jaw tightened. Sometimes fraudulent purchases take time to show up in the system. The credit card company might not have flagged it yet. Samantha Carlos said quietly, "The passenger has valid documentation and a confirmed seat assignment. We need to let her board." But Samantha Rodriguez was no longer listening to reason. 8 years of pent-up frustration, the sting of being passed over for promotion, and her own unexamined prejudices had created a perfect storm of bad judgment. She looked at Jasmine Thompson and saw everything she thought was wrong with passengers who tried to game the system. "I'm not comfortable allowing this passenger to board without additional verification," she announced loudly. "I've seen too many cases of fraudulent first-class bookings. Airport security should be involved." The words hit the gate area like a thunderclap. Passengers stopped their conversations. Children looked up from their devices. The atmosphere shifted from mild curiosity to genuine tension. Jasmine felt the moment crystallize around her like ice forming on a window. She could back down, accept whatever accommodations Samantha offered, and avoid the scene that was clearly developing. She could call her father and let him sort it out with a single phone call. Or she could stand her ground and trust that the truth would eventually win out. "My ticket is valid," she said, clearly loud enough for everyone in the gate area to hear. I purchased it legally with my own money, and I would like to board the aircraft and take the seat I paid for." Samantha's eyes flashed with something that looked like triumph. "We'll see about that," she muttered, reaching for the radio clipped to her uniform. 20 minutes later, after Carlos Hernandez had quietly overruled Samantha's objections and personally verified Jasmine's booking with the airport supervisor, Jasmine Thompson finally walked down the jet bridge toward Phoenix Airways Flight 447. Her boarding pass had been scanned 3 separate times by 3 different airline employees, each scan confirming what she had known from the beginning: her ticket was legitimate, her seat was confirmed, and she belonged exactly where she was going. But the delay had cost her something more valuable than time. Every passenger boarding behind her had witnessed some portion of the confrontation at the gate. Some looked at her with sympathy, others with curiosity, and a few with the kind of suspicion that Samantha Rodriguez had worked so hard to cultivate. As Jasmine entered the first-class cabin, she felt the familiar weight of being the only black passenger in a space where she was clearly unexpected. The other first-class passengers were already settling into their seats: Robert Mitchell in 4A, typing furiously on his laptop; Jennifer Walsh in 3B, reviewing legal documents with highlighter in hand; Harold and Dorothy Kim in 5A, and 5B sharing a travel magazine and speaking quietly in Korean. Seat 2A was a window seat toward the front of the cabin, offering an excellent view of the wing and the Miami skyline beyond. Jasmine stored her backpack in the overhead compartment and settled into the leather seat, trying to shake off the tension from the gate encounter. She pulled out her tablet and opened the aerospace engineering textbook she had been studying, hoping to review some material for her upcoming exam on orbital mechanics. The equations and diagrams usually helped her focus, providing a mental escape into the logical, predictable world of physics and mathematics. But today she couldn't concentrate. She could feel eyes on her, and when she looked up, she saw Samantha Rodriguez standing in the galley, arms crossed, staring directly at her. The staring continued for several uncomfortable minutes. Samantha would find reasons to walk through the cabin, checking seatbelts that didn't need checking, asking passengers if they needed anything, while conspicuously avoiding Jasmine's row. Other passengers began to notice the obvious surveillance. Robert Mitchell, who had been flying first class for nearly a decade, had never seen a flight attendant monitor a specific passenger so obviously. He found himself watching Samantha's behavior with growing concern. Something about the situation reminded him of stories his grandfather had told about the Jim Crow era, when black travelers faced constant scrutiny and suspicion. Finally, Samantha approached Jasmine's row with exaggerated casualness. "Excuse me, miss," she said loudly enough to catch the attention of nearby passengers. "I need to verify your boarding pass one more time." Jasmine looked up from her textbook, her patience wearing thin. "I've already shown my boarding pass to 3 different airline employees. It was scanned multiple times." "I understand that," Samantha replied, "but I'm the senior flight attendant on this aircraft, and I have the authority to verify any passenger's documentation if I have concerns about their ticket validity." The statement was technically true, but the way she wielded that authority felt like a weapon. Jennifer Walsh looked up from her legal briefs, her professional instincts fully activated. She had heard similar language in discrimination cases where authority figures used their legitimate powers to harass people they didn't think belonged. "What specifically concerns you about my ticket?" Jasmine asked calmly. Samantha gestured vaguely at Jasmine's appearance. Sometimes passengers purchase tickets they can't actually afford, thinking they can sort out payment later. Or family members buy tickets for other people without proper authorization. I need to make sure all our first-class passengers are properly documented. The coded language wasn't lost on anyone listening. Robert Mitchell set down his laptop and turned slightly in his seat to get a better view of the interaction. Harold Kim reached over and gently touched his wife's hand, both of them recognizing the ugly undertones of what they were witnessing. "My ticket was purchased with a valid credit card in my name 3 weeks ago," Jasmine replied evenly. "The airline has already confirmed this multiple times. Credit cards can be stolen," Samantha shot back. "Or, sometimes, young people use parents' cards without permission. I'm just trying to protect both you and the airline from potential fraud issues." That was the moment when Jasmine Thompson realized this had nothing to do with her ticket, her credit card, or airline security. This was about a flight attendant who had decided that a young black woman in a vintage t-shirt and jeans couldn't possibly belong in first class, and who was determined to find a way to prove it. She thought about her father's advice about maintaining dignity in the face of prejudice. She thought about the countless other passengers who might face similar treatment if this behavior went unchallenged. And she made a decision that would change everything. "I'd like to speak to the captain," Jasmine said clearly. Samantha's eyes widened slightly. Passengers requesting to speak to the captain was unusual and typically indicated a serious problem. "I don't think that's necessary," she said quickly. "I'm just trying to resolve a simple documentation issue." "It's not a documentation issue," Jasmine replied. "It's a harassment issue. I have a valid ticket, I've shown proper identification multiple times, and you continue to question my right to be here. I'd like the captain to explain why I'm being treated differently than every other first-class passenger on this aircraft." The cabin fell silent except for the sound of the air conditioning and the distant noise of ground crews preparing for departure. Other passengers had stopped pretending to read or work and were openly watching the confrontation unfold. Robert Mitchell pulled out his phone and began recording. "This is getting out of hand," he murmured loud enough for others to hear. Jennifer Walsh closed her legal briefs and paid full attention to what was happening. As a civil rights attorney, she recognized this as a textbook case of discriminatory treatment, and she began mentally cataloging every detail for potential legal proceedings. Samantha realized she was losing control of the situation, but instead of de-escalating her frustration and pride, pushed her toward a fateful decision. "Fine," she said, "I'll get the captain. But if there's any irregularity with your ticket, you'll be deplaned before we push back from the gate." As she walked toward the cockpit, Jasmine felt her heart pounding. She had just escalated a situation that could result in her being removed from the aircraft and potentially banned from flying Phoenix Airways in the future. But she also knew that backing down would validate Samantha's behavior and ensure that other passengers would face similar treatment. She pulled out her phone and sent a quick text to her father. "Flight delayed some issues at gate. We'll call when I land." She didn't want to worry him, but she also wanted someone to know what was happening in case the situation deteriorated further. What Jasmine didn't know was that her father, Nathan Thompson, founder and CEO of Phoenix Airways, was currently in a board meeting at company headquarters in Atlanta. His phone was on silent and he wouldn't see her message for another 30 minutes. By then, it would be too late to prevent what happened next. Captain James Sullivan emerged from the cockpit with the confident stride of someone who had handled countless passenger disputes over 2 decades of commercial flying. At 49, he had earned a reputation as a steady leader who ran efficient flights and supported his crew's decisions. Passengers respected his authority, and his crew trusted his judgment. Today, that trust would be catastrophically misplaced. Sullivan approached Jasmine's seat with Samantha Rodriguez trailing behind him, her expression a mixture of vindication and barely controlled anger. The captain's presence had drawn the attention of every passenger in the first-class cabin, and several were discreetly recording the interaction on their phones. "Ma'am," Sullivan said in his practiced professional tone, "I understand there's some confusion about your ticket. My senior flight attendant is concerned about possible irregularities with your booking." Jasmine looked up at him with steady eyes. "There are no irregularities with my booking, Captain. Your flight attendant has questioned my identification multiple times despite the fact that my ticket has been verified by 3 different airline employees. I'd like to know why I'm being subjected to treatment that no other first-class passenger has received." Sullivan had heard Samantha's version of events during their brief conversation in the galley. According to her account, a young passenger with a suspicious-looking boarding pass was being evasive about her ticket purchase and becoming hostile when asked routine security questions. He had no reason to doubt his experienced crew member's assessment. "Sometimes our online booking system experiences glitches," Sullivan explained, using the same patronizing tone he had developed for dealing with passengers he considered difficult. It's possible you purchased an economy ticket but received a first-class confirmation by mistake. These things happen more often than you'd think. Jennifer Walsh felt her blood pressure rising. As a civil rights attorney, she had seen this exact pattern countless times, authority figures backing each other up without bothering to examine the facts while the victim was forced to prove their innocence over and over again. Captain Jennifer interjected, standing up from her seat in 3B. "I'm an attorney, and I've been watching this entire interaction. This passenger has provided valid documentation multiple times. She's been singled out for scrutiny that other passengers haven't faced, and now you're suggesting her ticket might be invalid despite the fact that your own employees have confirmed it's legitimate." Sullivan turned to look at Jennifer with obvious annoyance. "Ma'am, I appreciate your concern, but this is an airline matter. I need to ask you to return to your seat and allow us to handle this situation." "This is a civil rights matter," Jennifer replied firmly. "And as a passenger on this aircraft, I have the right to witness what's happening." Robert Mitchell looked up from his phone, which was still recording. "Captain, I've been flying Phoenix Airways for years, and I've never seen a passenger treated like this. The young woman has been nothing but polite and cooperative. Your flight attendant is the one who seems to be creating the problem." Samantha's face flushed with anger. She had expected the captain to support her authority and resolve the situation quickly. Instead, other passengers were taking the fraudulent passenger's side and making her look like the aggressor. "These passengers don't understand the security protocols we follow," Samantha said loudly. "We see attempted fraud every day, and part of our job is protecting the airline and legitimate passengers from people who try to game the system." Harold Kim spoke up from his seat across the aisle, his accented English clear and forceful. "Young lady, we have been watching. This passenger has done nothing wrong. You are the one creating problems." His wife, Dorothy, nodded emphatically. "We have seen this before many years ago. It was wrong then, and it is wrong now." Captain Sullivan felt the situation spiraling out of his control. Half his first-class passengers were now involved in what should have been a simple documentation issue. His flight was delayed, his crew was being questioned by passengers, and his authority was being challenged publicly. In his mind, there was only one way to restore order and get his aircraft moving toward its scheduled departure time. "Ma'am," he said to Jasmine, "I'm going to have to ask you to gather your belongings and come with us. We'll sort this out at the gate, and if there's been a mistake, we'll get you properly situated." The words hit Jasmine like a physical blow. After everything she had been through, after her ticket had been verified multiple times by multiple people, she was still being removed from the flight. The injustice of it made her chest tighten and her hands shake with suppressed emotion. But she had promised herself she would maintain her dignity no matter what happened. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break down or lose control. "Captain," she said quietly, "I am not leaving this seat. I purchased this ticket legally. I have provided all the documentation you've requested, and I have done nothing to warrant removal from this aircraft. If you force me to leave, it will be because of discrimination, not because of any legitimate security concern." The word discrimination hung in the air like an explosive device. Captain Sullivan felt his jaw clench. In his experience, passengers who played the race card were usually trying to manipulate the situation to their advantage. "Ma'am, this is not about discrimination. This is about following proper procedures and ensuring the security of all passengers on this aircraft." "Then explain to me," Jasmine said, her voice growing stronger, "why I'm the only passenger who has been required to provide additional documentation. Explain why I'm the only one who has been questioned about how I purchased my ticket. Explain why I'm the only one being threatened with removal." Samantha Rodriguez had heard enough. 8 years of pent-up frustration, the humiliation of being questioned by passengers, and her own stubborn pride combined into a moment of catastrophic poor judgment. "Fine," she snapped, reaching for Jasmine's phone, which was displaying the boarding pass. "Let's see this precious ticket of yours." Before anyone could react, before Jasmine could pull the phone away, before Captain Sullivan could stop her, Samantha grabbed the device and stared at the screen showing the digital boarding pass. "Seat 2A, she read aloud mockingly. "First class. Right. And then in a moment that would be replayed millions of times on social media, analyzed by legal experts and cited in discrimination lawsuits for years to come, Samantha Rodriguez made the worst decision of her professional life. She opened her other hand to reveal Jasmine's printed backup boarding pass, which she had apparently taken from Jasmine's belongings while she was distracted by the captain's arrival. With deliberate theatrical slowness, she tore the boarding pass in half. The sound of paper ripping echoed through the cabin like a gunshot. Oh, for a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The only sound was the gentle hum of the aircraft's electrical systems and the sharp intake of breath from a dozen witnesses. Samantha dropped the torn pieces onto Jasmine's lap with a satisfied smirk. "Oops," she said mockingly. "Looks like you'll need to get a new boarding pass." From the economy counter, the cabin erupted. "Oh my God," Robert Mitchell exclaimed, his phone capturing every detail. "That's assault," Jennifer Walsh shouted, already mentally composing the civil rights lawsuit that would inevitably follow. "This is outrageous," Harold Kim called out in his accented English while Dorothy reached for her own phone to start recording. But Jasmine Thompson sat perfectly still, staring down at the torn pieces of paper in her lap. The boarding pass that represented her right to be there, her legitimacy as a passenger, her dignity as a human being, lay in shreds. She'd been humiliated, degraded, and literally torn down in front of a cabin full of strangers. Any reasonable person would have been angry, would have shouted, would have demanded justice immediately. Instead, Jasmine Thompson did something that would ultimately prove far more powerful than any outburst could have been. She reached into her backpack, pulled out her phone, and made a call. "Hi, Dad," she said quietly, her voice steady, despite the chaos around her. "I'm having a problem with your airline." The phrase "your airline" hung in the air for exactly 3 seconds before Samantha Rodriguez let out a sharp, derisive laugh. "Right," she said mockingly, loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. "And I suppose you're related to the Pope, too." She turned to Captain Sullivan with exaggerated exasperation. "Captain, this is exactly what I was talking about. When confronted with the consequences of fraud, these people always come up with elaborate stories." But Jasmine wasn't paying attention to Samantha's mockery. She was speaking quietly into her phone, and her words were beginning to penetrate the awareness of passengers who were listening carefully. "Dad, I'm on Flight 447 to Atlanta." She continued calmly. "Gate A-12. There's been an incident with a flight attendant named Samantha Rodriguez. She tore up my boarding pass and is trying to have me removed from the aircraft." Jennifer Walsh, whose legal training had taught her to listen for important details, felt a chill run down her spine. The young woman wasn't just claiming to know someone important. She was providing specific details, specific names, as if she genuinely expected her father to be able to do something about the situation. Captain Sullivan, meanwhile, was growing increasingly impatient with what he saw as a passenger making increasingly desperate claims to avoid the consequences of her fraudulent ticket. "Ma'am, I need you to end that phone call and come with us immediately. You're disrupting the other passengers and delaying our departure." "One moment," Captain Jasmine said politely, still speaking into her phone. "Dad, the captain's name is James Sullivan. The flight attendant who destroyed my boarding pass is Samantha Rodriguez." She paused, listening. "Yes, I'm fine. No, I haven't raised my voice or done anything wrong." Robert Mitchell lowered his phone and leaned forward in his seat. Something about the young woman's demeanor was compelling. She wasn't acting like someone caught in a lie. She was acting like someone who genuinely expected help to arrive soon. Samantha's patience finally snapped completely. "That's enough," she shouted, reaching for Jasmine's phone. "Security, I need security in the first-class cabin immediately." Her call was answered within moments by 2 airport security officers who had been stationed near the gate area. Michael Torres, a 34-year-old Hispanic officer with 6 years of airport security experience, entered the aircraft first, followed by Susan Bradley, a 41-year-old white officer known for her no-nonsense approach to passenger disputes. "What seems to be the problem?" Officer Torres asked, surveying the tense scene in the first-class cabin. Samantha immediately launched into her version of events, speaking rapidly and with obvious agitation. We have a passenger with fraudulent documentation who has been disruptive and uncooperative. She's been asked to deplane multiple times but refuses to comply. She's now making threatening phone calls and claiming to have connections she obviously doesn't have." Officer Bradley looked around the cabin, noting the torn boarding pass pieces still scattered in Jasmine's lap and the numerous passengers who were recording the interaction on their phones. "Ma'am," she said to Jasmine, "can you please end your phone call and provide identification?" Jasmine looked up calmly. "I'm speaking with my father about this situation. I'll be happy to provide identification as soon as I finish this call. End the call now." Officer Bradley commanded her tone, brooking no argument. Jasmine spoke into the phone one more time. "Dad, airport security is here. I need to go." She listened for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, I understand. I'll wait." She ended the call and handed her driver's license to Officer Torres, who examined it carefully while Officer Bradley questioned Captain Sullivan about the situation. Meanwhile, Jennifer Walsh stood up from her seat, her civil rights training compelling her to intervene. "Officers, my name is Jennifer Walsh, and I'm an attorney. I've witnessed this entire incident from the beginning, and I need you to know that this passenger has been subjected to discriminatory treatment." Officer Torres looked up from Jasmine's identification. "Ma'am, I need you to return to your seat. We'll take witness statements if necessary, but right now we need to focus on resolving the immediate situation." "The immediate situation," Jennifer replied firmly, "is that this young woman has been harassed and humiliated by airline staff despite having valid documentation. Multiple passengers witnessed the flight attendant deliberately destroy this passenger's boarding pass. Harold Kim stood up from his seat across the aisle, his wife Dorothy beside him. "Officers, we saw everything. This young lady did nothing wrong. The flight attendant was very rude and aggressive." Officer Bradley was beginning to feel overwhelmed by the number of passengers who seemed to be supporting the accused fraudster. In her experience, legitimate fraud cases were usually clear-cut with obvious evidence and minimal passenger sympathy for the perpetrator. "Let me see the boarding pass," she said to Samantha. Samantha gestured toward the torn pieces still in Jasmine's lap. She was carrying what appeared to be a fraudulent boarding pass. When I attempted to examine it more closely, it came apart. Robert Mitchell let out a short, incredulous laugh. "That's not what happened at all. The flight attendant deliberately tore up her boarding pass in front of all of us. I have it on video if you'd like to see it." Officer Torres felt his stomach sink. Passenger disputes were complicated enough without video evidence that contradicted crew member statements. "Sir, can you please show me that video?" As Robert began pulling up the recording on his phone, Officer Bradley was examining Jasmine's identification and trying to make sense of the situation. "Miss Thompson, can you explain how you purchased your ticket? I bought it online 3 weeks ago using my own credit card," Jasmine replied calmly. "The purchase was verified by multiple airline employees before boarding. I have the confirmation email, credit card statement, and digital boarding pass on my phone if you'd like to see them." Officer Torres watched Robert Mitchell's video with growing concern. The footage clearly showed Samantha Rodriguez deliberately tearing up what appeared to be a legitimate boarding pass while making mocking comments about the passenger. Nothing in the video suggested fraudulent activity on Jasmine's part. "Miss Rodriguez," he said to the flight attendant, "can you explain why you destroyed this passenger's boarding pass?" Samantha's face flushed red. The document looked suspicious. "I was following security protocols for potential fraud cases." "What specifically looked suspicious about it?" Officer Bradley asked. The format was wrong, and the seat assignment seemed inconsistent with the passenger's profile. Jennifer Walsh couldn't contain herself any longer. "Officers, what you're witnessing is textbook racial profiling. This passenger was targeted because of her race and age, not because of any legitimate security concerns." Officer Torres was beginning to reach the same conclusion, but he needed to follow proper procedures. "Miss Thompson, I'm going to need you to come with us while we sort this out. If your documentation is legitimate, we'll have you back on board quickly." It was at that moment that Jasmine's phone began ringing with a call from an unknown number. She looked at the screen, then at the security officers. May I answer this? I believe it's related to this situation. Officer Bradley nodded reluctantly, and Jasmine answered the call on speakerphone. Miss Thompson, this is Diana Rodriguez, Vice President of Operations for Phoenix Airways. Your father asked me to contact you immediately. Are you safe and unharmed? The cabin fell absolutely silent. Samantha Rodriguez felt the blood drain from her face as she heard her own last name spoken by a Phoenix Airways executive. Officer Torres exchanged glances with his partner, both of them realizing that this situation had just become far more complicated than a typical passenger dispute. I'm fine, Miss Rodriguez, Jasmine replied calmly, though I've been subjected to discriminatory treatment by your staff. I understand, and I want to assure you that we take such allegations extremely seriously. I'm currently reviewing the incident with our security team and legal department. Is Captain Sullivan available to speak with me? Captain Sullivan, who had been growing increasingly uncomfortable as the situation developed, reluctantly took Jasmine's phone. This is Captain Sullivan. Captain, this is Diana Rodriguez, VP of Operations. I need you to immediately suspend any action against Miss Thompson pending a full investigation of this incident. I also need you to preserve all security footage and documentation related to this matter. Sullivan's hands began to shake slightly as he realized the implications. Ma'am, I was just following standard security procedures based on my crew's assessment. Captain, the passenger you're attempting to remove is Jasmine Thompson, daughter of Nathan Thompson, founder and CEO of Phoenix Airways. She is traveling on a legitimate ticket purchased with company approval. Any further action against her without cause would constitute a serious violation of company policy. The phone call was still on speaker, which meant every passenger in the first-class cabin heard the announcement. Samantha Rodriguez sank into a nearby seat, her face pale with the realization of what she had done. She had not only harassed a legitimate passenger, she had attacked the boss's daughter. Officer Torres cleared his throat. Miss Rodriguez, given this new information, I think we need to reassess the situation. Miss Thompson, you're free to remain in your seat. Officers will be conducting a full investigation of the allegations of discriminatory treatment. But even as the immediate crisis began to resolve, Jasmine Thompson knew that the real reckoning was just beginning. Through the aircraft's windows, she could see a convoy of black SUVs pulling up to the gate, and she recognized the purposeful stride of the man getting out of the lead vehicle. Her father had arrived, and Phoenix Airways was about to learn what happened when someone targeted Nathan Thompson's daughter. Nathan Thompson ended the emergency call with his operations team and stepped out of the black SUV with the measured calm of a man who had built a billion-dollar airline from a single aircraft and 3 employees. At 51, he had weathered industry recessions, regulatory challenges, and countless competitive threats. But nothing had ever made him as quietly furious as the phone call he had received 20 minutes ago. His daughter was being discriminated against on his own airline. Behind him, a small army of Phoenix Airways executives emerged from the convoy of vehicles. Diana Rodriguez, VP of Operations, was already coordinating with airport security through her earpiece. Frank Kowalski, Chief Security Officer and former FBI agent, was reviewing incident reports on his tablet as he walked. Patricia Liu, Regional Manager for Southeast Operations, was fielding calls from the company's legal department. Sir Diana said as they approached the gate area, "We've confirmed that, miss. Thompson is safe and has been cleared by airport security. The incident is contained, but we have multiple passengers recording video, and social media activity is already beginning to spike." Nathan nodded grimly. "What's our exposure?" Frank Kowalski looked up from his tablet. "Potentially severe. If the allegations are substantiated, we're looking at civil rights violations, possible federal discrimination charges, and almost certain viral social media backlash. The incident occurred in full view of first-class passengers, including a civil rights attorney and several business travelers who appear to be posting in real time, and the crew members involved Flight Attendant Samantha Rodriguez and Captain James Sullivan. Rodriguez appears to be the primary actor, but Sullivan backed her decisions and authorized the attempted removal." Nathan felt his jaw tighten. He had known Jim Sullivan for 8 years. The captain had been hired away from a competitor with promises of better working conditions and company culture. Nathan had personally approved his hiring and had considered him a solid, reliable pilot. Sir Patricia Liu interjected, "There's something else you need to know. Our preliminary review suggests this might not be an isolated incident. We're seeing patterns in customer complaints that indicate Rodriguez may have engaged in similar behavior before." The revelation hit Nathan like a physical blow. How many complaints we're still investigating, but initial data suggests at least 6 formal complaints involving minority passengers over the past 18 months. All were classified as misunderstandings or communication issues by the regional management team. Nathan stopped walking and turned to face his executive team. "Are you telling me that my airline has been systematically discriminating against passengers for over a year, and nobody thought to escalate this to senior management?" Diana Rodriguez looked uncomfortable. "Sir, the complaints were handled at the regional level. The pattern wasn't identified because they were processed separately by different managers." "That's going to change," Nathan said quietly, but his tone carried the unmistakable weight of absolute authority. "Frank, I want every discrimination complaint from the past 3 years reviewed by your team. Diana, I want a complete audit of our passenger treatment protocols. Patricia, I want to know exactly who knew what and when they knew it." As they entered the terminal, Nathan could see Gate A12 in the distance. A crowd had gathered around the boarding area with airport security officers maintaining a perimeter around the aircraft. Several passengers were standing outside the jet bridge, apparently having deplaned to avoid the disruption. "Mr. Thompson," a voice called out from behind them. Nathan turned to see Maria Santos, the gate supervisor who had initially overruled Samantha Rodriguez's objections to Jasmine's boarding. She looked nervous but determined. "Sir, I wanted you to know that I tried to intervene when I realized what was happening. Carlos Hernandez, our gate agent, also attempted to de-escalate the situation. We both verified Miss Thompson's ticket multiple times and confirmed it was legitimate." Nathan studied the woman's face, reading the genuine concern and guilt in her expression. "Miss Santos, I appreciate you speaking up. I want you to know that employees who try to do the right thing will be protected. Can you walk me through exactly what happened?" As Maria recounted the events at the gate, Nathan felt his anger growing, not just at the discrimination his daughter had faced, but at the system failures that had allowed such treatment to become normalized. The fact that 2 employees had tried to intervene suggested that the problematic behavior was obvious and preventable. Sir Frank Kowalski said quietly, "We need to board the aircraft. Miss Thompson is still in seat 2A, and the other passengers are growing restless." Nathan nodded and walked purposefully toward the jet bridge. As he stepped onto the aircraft, he could immediately sense the tension in the air. The first-class cabin buzzed with nervous energy, with passengers whispering among themselves and several still holding phones that were clearly recording. He saw his daughter immediately. Jasmine was sitting calmly in seat 2A, her aerospace engineering textbook open in her lap. The torn pieces of her boarding pass arranged neatly on the seat-side table. She looked up as he approached, and Nathan felt his heart break at the quiet dignity in her eyes. "Hey, Dad," she said softly. Nathan leaned down and hugged his daughter gently, acutely aware that dozens of phones were capturing the moment. "Are you okay, sweetheart? I'm fine. Just tired." Nathan straightened and surveyed the cabin. He recognized the civil rights attorney from news coverage, the businessman who appeared to be live streaming on social media, and the elderly couple who were watching the interaction with obvious sympathy. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said in a clear, calm voice that carried throughout the cabin, "my name is Nathan Thompson. I'm the founder and CEO of Phoenix Airways. I want to personally apologize for the unacceptable treatment my daughter has received, and for the disruption this has caused to your travel." Robert Mitchell lowered his phone. "Mr. Thompson, I've been flying your airline for years, and I've never seen anything like what happened here today. Your flight attendant was completely out of line." "I agree completely, sir, and I want to assure you that there will be immediate and appropriate consequences for the behavior you witnessed." Jennifer Walsh stood up from her seat. Mr. Thompson, I'm Jennifer Walsh, a civil rights attorney. What I witnessed today was textbook discrimination. Your daughter handled herself with remarkable grace, but she shouldn't have had to endure that treatment at all. Nathan nodded grimly. Miss Walsh, you're absolutely right. The behavior you witnessed violates every principle my company was built on. I founded Phoenix Airways with the belief that every passenger deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their background or appearance. Harold Kim spoke up in his accented English. Mr. Thompson, your daughter is a very brave young woman. She stood up for herself with great dignity. Thank you, sir. She learned that from her mother. Nathan looked around the cabin one more time, meeting the eyes of each passenger who had witnessed his daughter's humiliation. I want you all to know that what happened here today will result in fundamental changes to how Phoenix Airways trains and monitors our staff. No passenger should ever face the treatment my daughter received. At that moment, Captain Sullivan appeared from the cockpit, his face pale and his hands visibly shaking. Behind him came Samantha Rodriguez, escorted by airport security officers. Nathan turned to face them both, and the cabin fell absolutely silent. Captain Sullivan, Miss Rodriguez. His voice was quiet, but it carried the unmistakable weight of judgment. I think we need to have a conversation. The silence in the first-class cabin was absolute as Nathan Thompson stood face-to-face with the two Phoenix Airways employees who had humiliated his daughter. Captain James Sullivan's 20-year career flashed before his eyes as he met the gaze of the man who had personally hired him. Samantha Rodriguez stood behind the airport security officers, her face drained of all color, as the full magnitude of her actions finally sank in. Captain Sullivan Nathan said calmly, "Would you like to explain to me why my daughter was threatened with removal from an aircraft she had every right to be on?" Sullivan's mouth opened and closed several times before he found his voice. "Sir, I was responding to concerns raised by my senior flight attendant about potential documentation irregularities. I was following standard security protocols." "Standard security protocols," Nathan repeated slowly. "Tell me, Captain, what specific irregularities did you observe in my daughter's documentation?" The question hung in the air like a sword. Sullivan realized he had never actually examined Jasmine's documentation himself. He had simply trusted Samantha's assessment and acted on her recommendations. The flight attendant, reported concerns about the boarding pass format and the passenger's profile. Sullivan stammered. Nathan's eyes never left the captain's face. The passenger's profile. What exactly does that mean, Captain? Before Sullivan could answer, Jennifer Walsh stood up again. "Mr. Thompson, if I may, I'm an attorney, and I witnessed the entire incident. Your daughter was singled out for scrutiny that other passengers didn't face. When asked to explain the irregularities, your flight attendant made vague statements about the passenger not looking right for first class." Robert Mitchell nodded vigorously. "That's exactly what happened. The flight attendant kept staring at your daughter from the moment she sat down, then started questioning her ticket for no apparent reason." Harold Kim spoke up from his seat. "Mr. Thompson, we have traveled many times and we know discrimination when we see it. Your daughter was treated very badly." Nathan turned his attention to Samantha Rodriguez, who was now visibly trembling. "Miss Rodriguez, you've been with Phoenix Airways for 8 years. In that time, have you ever torn up a passenger's boarding pass?" Samantha's voice came out as barely a whisper. "No, sir. Have you ever questioned a first-class passenger's right to their seat based on their appearance?" "I was concerned about fraud, sir. We're trained to watch for suspicious behavior." "Suspicious behavior," Nathan repeated. "Miss Rodriguez, my daughter, is a junior at Howard University studying aerospace engineering. She earned her ticket to that seat through a NASA internship. What exactly was suspicious about her behavior? The question exposed the hollowness of Samantha's justifications. Jasmine had been quiet, polite, and cooperative throughout the entire ordeal. She had provided documentation when requested, answered questions respectfully, and maintained her composure even when being publicly humiliated. Diana Rodriguez, the VP of Operations, stepped forward with a tablet in her hands. "Sir, I've been reviewing Miss Rodriguez's service record while we were walking to the aircraft. She's received multiple complaints over the past 18 months, all involving minority passengers in premium cabin. The revelation sent a murmur through the cabin. Several passengers pulled out their phones again, realizing they were witnessing not just the aftermath of a single incident, but the exposure of a pattern of discriminatory behavior. Multiple complaints. Nathan said, his voice growing colder. Miss Rodriguez, were you aware that passengers had complained about your treatment of minority travelers? Samantha's shoulders sagged. I received some feedback, but my supervisor said they were isolated incidents. Misunderstandings. Nathan looked around the cabin at the passengers who had witnessed the events. Miss Walsh, as an attorney, would you characterize what you witnessed as a misunderstanding? Jennifer Walsh shook her head firmly. Absolutely not. What I witnessed was deliberate targeted harassment based on racial profiling. The flight attendant made assumptions about your daughter's legitimacy as a passenger based solely on her appearance and demographics. Frank Kowalski, the chief security officer, approached Nathan with his tablet. Sir, I've just received preliminary results from our complaint database analysis. Over the past 3 years, Ms. Rodriguez has been involved in 17 incidents involving minority passengers. All were classified as service issues rather than discrimination complaints. The number hit the cabin like a thunderbolt. 17 incidents meant this wasn't an isolated case of bad judgment. It represented a pattern of behavior that had been allowed to continue unchecked for years. Nathan felt a cold fury building in his chest. 17 incidents. Captain Sullivan, as the senior crew member on this aircraft, were you aware of Miss Rodriguez's history of problematic interactions with minority passengers? Sullivan shook his head rapidly. No, sir. I had no knowledge of any prior complaints. Yet you supported her decision to remove my daughter without examining any evidence yourself. The captain realized he was trapped by his own lack of due diligence. Sir, I trusted my crew's professional judgment. Your crew's professional judgment, Nathan said, led to my daughter being publicly humiliated, having her boarding pass destroyed, and being threatened with arrest. All because a flight attendant decided she didn't look right for first class. Patricia Liu, the regional manager, had been reviewing incident reports on her phone. She looked up with obvious distress. Sir, there's more. The complaints involving Miss Rodriguez weren't just filed and forgotten. They were actively minimized by regional management. Several passengers who filed formal complaints were told their concerns were unfounded or based on misunderstandings. Nathan turned to look at his daughter, who had been listening to the conversation with remarkable composure. Jasmine, how are you holding up? I'm okay, Dad. But I keep thinking about all the other passengers who went through this and didn't have someone who could call the CEO. Her words cut through Nathan's anger and reached something deeper. This wasn't just about his daughter anymore. It was about every passenger who'd been profiled, harassed, or humiliated by employees who thought they could get away with it because their victims had no recourse. You're right, Nathan said quietly, and that stops today. He turned to address the cabin full of passengers who had become unwitting witnesses to a corporate reckoning. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to know that what happened here today represents a complete failure of the values Phoenix Airways was built on. My daughter shouldn't have had to endure this treatment, and neither should any passenger on my airline. Dorothy Kim spoke up in her soft voice. Mr. Thompson, your daughter handled this situation with great dignity. You should be proud of her. Nathan smiled for the first time since entering the aircraft. I am incredibly proud of her, but I'm ashamed that she had to demonstrate that dignity in the face of such unprofessional treatment from my own employees. Robert Mitchell had been recording the entire interaction. Mr. Thompson, I have to ask, what happens next? This video is going to be seen by millions of people. Nathan nodded grimly. What happens next is that Phoenix Airways takes responsibility for what occurred here today and implements changes to ensure it never happens again. Miss Rodriguez and Captain Sullivan, you're both suspended immediately pending a full investigation. The words hit both employees like physical blows. Sullivan's face went ashen as he realized his career was effectively over. Samantha Rodriguez began crying quietly, finally understanding the full consequences of her actions. But Nathan Thompson wasn't finished. The reckoning had only just begun. Within 30 minutes of Nathan Thompson's arrival at Gate A-12 Phoenix Airways Flight, 447 had been transformed from a routine commercial flight into the epicenter of a corporate crisis that would reshape the entire airline industry. As security officers escorted Samantha Rodriguez off the aircraft, her termination already processed through Phoenix Airways' Human Resources Department, Nathan stood before the first-class passengers who had witnessed his daughter's humiliation. "Ladies and gentlemen," Nathan announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had built an airline from nothing. "I want to personally ensure that your travel experience concludes positively despite the unacceptable disruption you've witnessed. Miss Rodriguez's employment with Phoenix Airways has been terminated effective immediately." The cabin erupted in spontaneous applause. Robert Mitchell, who had been live-streaming portions of the incident, lowered his phone and began clapping. Jennifer Walsh nodded approvingly from her seat, while Harold and Dorothy Kim exchanged satisfied glances. Furthermore, Nathan continued, "Captain Sullivan has been suspended pending a full investigation of his role in this incident. We have a replacement crew standing by and we'll have you airborne to Atlanta within the hour." But even as Nathan addressed the immediate situation, his mind was racing through the broader implications of what had occurred. Diana Rodriguez, his VP of Operations, approached with an expression of barely controlled panic. "Sir," she whispered urgently, "the social media situation is exploding. Robert Mitchell's live stream reached over 50,000 viewers in real time. Video clips are being shared across all platforms, and major news outlets are already calling for statements." Nathan nodded grimly. "Schedule a press conference for this afternoon. We're going to address this head-on, not try to hide from it or spin it into something it wasn't." Frank Kowalski, the chief security officer, had been coordinating with airport authorities throughout the incident. He approached Nathan with his tablet displaying multiple incident reports. "Sir, we need to discuss the legal implications immediately. The passenger treatment documented here could trigger federal civil rights investigations." Good Nathan replied, surprising his security chief. "We'll cooperate fully with any investigation. Phoenix Airways has nothing to hide and everything to learn from this situation." Meanwhile, Jasmine Thompson had been quietly observing the corporate response unfolding around her. She stood up from seat 2A, gathering the torn pieces of her boarding pass that had started the entire confrontation. "Dad," she said quietly, "can we talk privately for a moment?" Nathan followed his daughter to the far end of the first-class cabin away from the other passengers and airline employees who were managing the crisis response. "How are you really doing with all this?" Nathan asked, studying his daughter's face for signs of the trauma she must be experiencing. "I'm okay," Jasmine replied, "but I'm worried about something. This is going to be a huge story, isn't it? My name, my face, everything that happened here is going to be all over the news." Nathan felt a stab of guilt as he realized that his daughter was about to become the public face of airline discrimination, whether she wanted that role or not. "Sweetheart, we can limit your public exposure. You don't have to do interviews or make statements if you don't want to." "That's not what I'm worried about," Jasmine said firmly. "I'm worried about all the passengers who went through similar treatment and didn't have a CEO father to call. What happens to them?" The question struck Nathan like lightning. His daughter, at 20 years old, was demonstrating a sense of social responsibility that humbled him. While he had been focused on immediate damage control and corporate accountability, she was thinking about the broader implications for other travelers who lacked her privileges. "What do you think we should do?" he asked. "I think Phoenix Airways should establish a fund to compensate passengers who were discriminated against in the past. And I think we should create an independent review board to investigate complaints so this can't happen again." Nathan stared at his daughter with growing admiration. "Those are excellent ideas. We'll implement both immediately." Their private conversation was interrupted by Patricia Liu, the regional manager, who approached with obvious urgency. Sir, we have a problem. Regional Director Stephen Walsh is refusing to come to headquarters. He's claiming the complaint filtering system was approved by senior management. Nathan's jaw tightened. Get legal on the phone. Walsh is terminated immediately, and we're conducting a full audit of every decision he made regarding discrimination complaints. The ripple effects of the day's events were spreading rapidly through Phoenix Airways' corporate structure. Within hours, multiple managers who had been complicit in suppressing discrimination complaints would find their careers ended. The company's entire approach to passenger relations would be scrutinized and reformed. Captain James Sullivan, meanwhile, was clearing out his cockpit for the final time. After 20 years of commercial aviation, his career was ending in disgrace. As he packed his flight manual and personal items, he reflected on the choices that had led to this moment. Sullivan had always prided himself on being a competent, reliable pilot who followed procedures and supported his crew. But he now realized that competence without conscience was meaningless. By failing to examine the evidence of discrimination himself, by blindly supporting Samantha Rodriguez's prejudiced judgments, he had betrayed the trust placed in him by passengers and airline management alike. The replacement captain, Maria Fernandez, a 15-year veteran with Phoenix Airways, boarded the aircraft with her crew and immediately sought out Nathan Thompson. "Sir," she said respectfully, "I want you to know that this aircraft will be operated with the highest standards of professionalism and respect for all passengers." Nathan shook her hand firmly. "Captain Fernandez, I appreciate your commitment. The passengers today have been through enough disruption." As the new crew prepared for departure, Nathan made one final announcement to the first-class cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for your patience during this difficult situation. Each of you will receive a full refund for today's flight, along with vouchers for future travel. More importantly, you have my personal guarantee that Phoenix Airways will use today's events as a catalyst for meaningful change throughout our organization." Jennifer Walsh approached Nathan before the flight's departure. "Mr. Thompson, as an attorney who specializes in civil rights cases, I want to commend your response to this incident. Most companies would have tried to minimize or cover up what happened. Ms. Walsh, covering up discrimination doesn't eliminate it. It just enables more of it. Phoenix Airways is committed to transparency and accountability. I'd like to follow up with your legal team about the broader patterns of discrimination your investigation uncovers. There may be other passengers who deserve compensation and recognition. Absolutely, we welcome your involvement in ensuring justice for any passenger who was mistreated." As Flight 447 finally pushed back from the gate nearly 2 hours behind schedule, Nathan Thompson remained in the terminal to face the media storm that was beginning to engulf Phoenix Airways. The incident had already been viewed millions of times on social media, generating thousands of comments and shares from travelers who had experienced similar discrimination. But rather than viewing the publicity as a crisis to be managed, Nathan saw it as an opportunity to demonstrate corporate leadership in addressing institutional prejudice. Phoenix Airways would become the first major airline to voluntarily audit its discrimination practices and implement comprehensive reforms. The transformation had begun, sparked by a torn boarding pass and a young woman's refusal to accept injustice. 3 days after the incident, on Flight 447, Phoenix Airways corporate headquarters in Atlanta had been transformed into the nerve center of the most comprehensive discrimination investigation in airline industry history. Nathan Thompson had authorized the hiring of external civil rights experts, former federal investigators, and independent auditors to examine every aspect of the company's passenger treatment protocols. The conference room on the executive floor buzzed with activity as teams of investigators reviewed thousands of customer complaints, employee records, and incident reports dating back 5 years. What they were discovering painted a disturbing picture of institutional problems that extended far beyond the actions of Samantha Rodriguez and Captain Sullivan. Frank Kowalski, the chief security officer, stood before a wall-sized display showing data visualization of complaint patterns. Red dots marked incidents involving minority passengers, while blue dots represented complaints from white travelers. The pattern was unmistakable. Minority passengers were 5 times more likely to have their complaints dismissed as misunderstandings or communication issues. Sir Kowalski said to Nathan, who was reviewing incident reports with Diana Rodriguez, the data tells a clear story. Regional Director Stephen Walsh didn't just filter complaints. He actively coached managers to minimize discrimination allegations. Nathan looked up from the reports with visible disgust. "Show me the evidence." Kowalski clicked to the next slide displaying email communications between Walsh and various regional managers. The messages revealed a deliberate strategy to reclassify discrimination complaints in ways that would prevent them from triggering federal reporting requirements or senior management attention. One email, dated 8 months earlier, read, "These passengers always claim discrimination when they don't get what they want. Classify as customer service issue and offer travel vouchers. Don't escalate unless absolutely necessary." Another message from just 3 months ago was even more damning. Flight crews need to maintain cabin standards. Support your attendants when they make judgment calls about passenger suitability. Better to err on the side of caution. Diana Rodriguez shook her head in disbelief. Stephen Walsh essentially created a permission structure for discrimination. He was telling managers and crew members that profiling passengers was not only acceptable, but expected. Dr. Angela Martinez, a civil rights expert hired to lead the external investigation, entered the conference room with a thick folder of additional findings. As a former Department of Justice attorney who had prosecuted airline discrimination cases, she brought both expertise and credibility to Phoenix Airways' internal review. "Mr. Thompson," Dr. Martinez said, "we've completed our review of passenger complaints from the past 3 years. The patterns we've identified are disturbing, but they're also actionable. We can trace specific policies and training practices that contributed to discriminatory treatment." She opened her folder and spread several documents across the conference table. Stephen Walsh implemented what he called passenger assessment protocols that encouraged flight crews to make subjective judgments about whether travelers belonged in premium cabins based on their appearance and behavior. Nathan examined the documents with growing anger. These protocols were never approved by senior management. Where did Walsh get the authority to implement them? "That's part of the problem," Dr. Martinez replied. Walsh was operating with significant autonomy in regional operations. The corporate structure gave him discretion to implement efficiency measures without detailed oversight from headquarters. Frank Kowalski pulled up another data visualization. "Sir, we've identified 43 Phoenix Airways employees who received Walsh's training on passenger assessment. 17 of them have been involved in subsequent discrimination complaints." The scope of the problem was becoming clear. What had appeared to be isolated incidents of individual prejudice were actually the result of deliberate training and policy decisions that had infected multiple levels of the organization. Patricia Liu, who had been conducting interviews with affected employees, approached the group with visible distress. "Sir, I need to report something else we've discovered. Several minority employees reported experiencing discrimination from their own colleagues after raising concerns about passenger treatment. Explain." Flight attendants and gate agents who questioned discriminatory practices were labeled as troublemakers or not team players. Some were reassigned to less desirable routes or shifts. A few quit rather than continue working in that environment. Nathan felt his stomach turn. Phoenix Airways hadn't just discriminated against passengers. The company had also silenced employees who tried to protect those passengers from mistreatment. Dr. Martinez nodded grimly. "This creates what we call a culture of complicity. Employees learn that speaking up against discrimination will hurt their careers, so they either participate in the behavior or remain silent when they witness it. How many employees are we talking about? At least 12 minority staff members reported experiencing retaliation for questioning discriminatory practices. Several more reported witnessing discrimination but feeling unable to intervene due to fear of career consequences." Nathan stood up and walked to the window overlooking the Phoenix Airways Operations Center, where hundreds of employees were managing flights across the country. How many of them had been trained to discriminate? How many passengers had been mistreated while good employees stayed silent out of fear? Mr. Thompson, Dr. Martinez said softly, "There's something else you need to know. We found evidence that this pattern of discrimination may have contributed to Phoenix Airways losing market share among minority travelers over the past 2 years." Nathan turned back to face the investigation team. "Show me." Kowalski pulled up travel industry data on his laptop. Minority business travelers have been choosing competitors over Phoenix Airways at increasing rates. Exit surveys and social media analysis suggest that word-of-mouth reports about discriminatory treatment were driving passengers to other airlines. The business implications were staggering. Phoenix Airways had been losing millions of dollars in revenue because discriminatory treatment was driving away passengers. The company's reputation in minority communities had been quietly deteriorating for months. Sir Diana Rodriguez said, "I've been reviewing our diversity and inclusion training programs. They're inadequate and outdated. Most employees received online training modules that focused on legal compliance rather than actually preventing discriminatory behavior." Dr. Martinez nodded. Compliance-based training teaches employees what they can't get sued for, not what they should actually do. Effective bias training requires hands-on scenarios, regular reinforcement, and accountability measures. Nathan returned to his seat at the conference table. "Dr. Martinez, I want you to design a completely new training program. Not just for compliance, but for creating a culture where discrimination is unthinkable. I'd recommend starting with senior management. Cultural change has to come from the top and be reinforced at every level." Frank Kowalski looked up from his tablet. "Sir, we also need to address the complaint handling process. The current system makes it too easy for discrimination reports to disappear or be minimized. What do you recommend independent oversight? An external review board that reports directly to the board of directors, not to regional management. Discrimination complaints should trigger automatic investigations that can't be buried or reclassified." Nathan nodded approvingly. "Implement that immediately." "What else?" Dr. Martinez consulted her notes. "We need to establish clear consequences for discriminatory behavior and, equally important, clear protections for employees who report discrimination. Right now, there's no incentive structure that supports doing the right thing." Patricia Liu raised another concern. "Sir, we also need to address the financial impact on passengers who were discriminated against. Some of them paid premium prices for services they didn't receive due to harassment and mistreatment. Establish a compensation fund," Nathan ordered immediately. "Any passenger who can demonstrate they were discriminated against will receive appropriate compensation, regardless of whether they filed formal complaints at the time." As the investigation team continued their work, Nathan reflected on how close his company had come to becoming synonymous with discrimination in the airline industry. If not for his daughter's incident, these patterns might have continued for years, driving away passengers and destroying the reputation he had spent decades building. But there was also something hopeful in the data they were uncovering. Several Phoenix Airways employees had tried to do the right thing even when the system worked against them. Carlos Hernandez, the gate agent who had defended Jasmine, represented dozens of staff members who wanted to provide excellent service to all passengers. Dr. Martinez Nathan said, "I want to identify every employee who spoke up against discrimination even when it put their careers at risk. Those people should be promoted and recognized as examples of the culture we want to build." That's an excellent idea. It sends a clear message that moral courage is valued and rewarded. As the afternoon wore on, the scope of necessary changes became overwhelming. Phoenix Airways would need to revise training programs, restructure complaint procedures, implement oversight mechanisms, and rebuild trust with communities that had been alienated by discriminatory treatment. But Nathan Thompson had built an airline from nothing, and he was determined to rebuild its culture with the same commitment that had created the company in the first place. Phoenix Airways would emerge from this crisis as an industry leader in civil rights and passenger dignity. The investigation was revealing painful truths, but it was also creating a roadmap for transformation that would benefit every passenger who flew with Phoenix Airways in the future. 1 week after the incident, on Flight 447, Nathan Thompson stood before a packed auditorium at Phoenix Airways headquarters facing 800 employees from across the company's operations. The audience included pilots, flight attendants, gate agents, mechanics, customer service representatives, and managers from every level of the organization. The tension in the room was palpable as employees waited to learn how their company would respond to the discrimination scandal that had dominated news coverage for days. 7 days ago, Nathan began his voice carrying to every corner of the auditorium, "Phoenix Airways failed one of our passengers in the most fundamental way possible. My daughter Jasmine was discriminated against, harassed, and humiliated by employees who forgot that every passenger who steps onto our aircraft deserves to be treated with dignity and respect." The room was absolutely silent. Many employees had seen the viral videos of the incident, and some had been personally affected by the investigation and reforms that followed. "But this isn't just about one incident or one passenger," Nathan continued. "Our investigation has revealed patterns of discriminatory treatment that violate everything Phoenix Airways was built on. Today, I'm announcing comprehensive changes that will transform how our company operates." He clicked a remote control, and a large screen displayed the Phoenix Airways Passenger Bill of Rights, a document that had been drafted by Dr. Angela Martinez and the Civil Rights Investigation Team. "Every Phoenix Airways employee will commit to these principles," Nathan announced, reading from the display. "Every passenger will be treated with dignity regardless of their race, ethnicity, religion, age, gender, sexual orientation, or economic status. Every passenger complaint will be investigated thoroughly and fairly. Every employee has a duty to intervene when they witness discriminatory treatment." Diana Rodriguez, the VP of Operations, took the podium next to outline specific policy changes. Effective immediately, Phoenix Airways is implementing zero-tolerance policies for discrimination. Any employee found engaging in discriminatory behavior will face immediate termination. Any manager who suppresses or minimizes discrimination complaints will face the same consequences. A murmur ran through the audience as employees realized the seriousness of the company's commitment to change. "We're also establishing an independent passenger rights office," Diana continued, headed by Dr. Angela Martinez, who will report directly to our board of directors. "This office will investigate all discrimination complaints and will have the authority to implement corrective actions throughout the company." Frank Kowalski, the chief security officer, addressed the audience about new oversight procedures. "Every passenger interaction that involves questioning someone's ticket or requesting additional documentation will be automatically reviewed by our Passenger Rights Office. Crew members will be required to provide written justification for any action that singles out individual passengers for special scrutiny." The announcement sent a clear message: the days of subjective passenger assessment were over. Flight attendants and gate agents would need objective reasons for any action that could be perceived as discriminatory. Nathan returned to the podium to address the human element of the changes. "I know some of you are concerned about how these new policies will affect your ability to do your jobs effectively. Let me be clear, these changes will make you better at your jobs by giving you clear, consistent guidelines for treating all passengers fairly." He clicked to the next slide, which displayed statistics about the company's performance since implementing emergency reforms following the investigation. "In the past week, since we began enforcing zero-tolerance policies, passenger satisfaction scores have increased significantly. Complaint resolution times have improved. And we've identified dozens of employees who have consistently provided excellent service to all passengers regardless of their backgrounds." Carlos Hernandez, the gate agent who had defended Jasmine Thompson during the original incident, was called to the stage. He approached the podium nervously, still processing the fact that he had been promoted to Director of Customer Experience for the Southeast region. Carlos demonstrated exactly the kind of judgment and moral courage we expect from Phoenix Airways employees, Nathan said, placing a hand on the young man's shoulder. When he saw discrimination happening, he intervened to protect a passenger's rights. "That's the standard we want every employee to meet." The promotion sent a powerful message to the assembled employees. Speaking up against discrimination wouldn't hurt their careers. It would advance them. Dr. Martinez took the podium to outline the new training programs that would be mandatory for all customer-facing employees. Traditional diversity training focuses on what you can't do, she explained. Our new program focuses on what you should do. You'll learn to recognize unconscious bias, practice de-escalation techniques, and develop skills for providing excellent service to passengers from all backgrounds. The training would be hands-on, scenario-based, and regularly updated based on real incidents and passenger feedback. Employees would be required to complete annual recertification, and their performance in bias-free customer service would be included in their annual reviews. Maria Santos, the gate supervisor who had tried to intervene during Jasmine's harassment, was promoted to Regional Customer Experience Director. As she addressed the audience, her voice carried the authority of someone who had earned her position by doing the right thing under pressure. I've worked for Phoenix Airways for 12 years, Maria said, and I've seen how easy it is for small prejudices to become big problems if nobody speaks up. The new policies give us permission to do what many of us wanted to do all along: treat every passenger like a valued customer. Nathan concluded the employee meeting with a personal commitment that would become central to Phoenix Airways' transformation. I'm establishing a $50 million fund to compensate passengers who were discriminated against in the past and to support civil rights organizations working to eliminate bias in the travel industry. This isn't about avoiding legal liability. It's about acknowledging the harm we've caused and working to repair it. The announcement was met with sustained applause from employees who understood that their company was choosing accountability over damage control. After the employee meeting, Nathan held a press conference that was broadcast live on multiple news networks. Reporters from across the country had gathered to hear how Phoenix Airways would respond to the discrimination scandal that had sparked national conversations about airline passenger treatment. Phoenix Airways takes full responsibility for the discriminatory treatment passengers have experienced, Nathan told the assembled media. We're not going to minimize these incidents or make excuses for them. Instead, we're implementing the most comprehensive anti-discrimination program in the airline industry. When asked about the financial impact of the reforms, Nathan was direct. Discrimination is expensive. It costs us passengers, it costs us reputation, and it costs us our values. The investment we're making in bias-free customer service will pay for itself through improved customer loyalty and operational efficiency. A reporter from the Washington Post asked about federal oversight of the airline industry. Nathan's response surprised many observers. I welcome federal oversight of airline passenger treatment policies, he said. Phoenix Airways will share our training materials and oversight procedures with any airline that wants to implement similar programs. Eliminating discrimination benefits the entire industry, not just our company. The press conference concluded with Nathan reading a statement from his daughter Jasmine, who had chosen not to appear publicly but wanted her voice heard in the company's response. My father built Phoenix Airways to be different from other airlines, Nathan read. Today, we're proving that companies can choose to be better when they're confronted with their failures. I hope other airlines will learn from our mistakes and implement similar protections for all passengers. As news of Phoenix Airways' comprehensive response spread through the industry, other airlines began quietly reviewing their own discrimination policies. The incident that had started with a torn boarding pass was beginning to transform passenger treatment standards across the aviation industry. The reforms at Phoenix Airways were just the beginning of a movement that would make air travel more dignified and equitable for millions of passengers. 3 months after the incident that changed everything, Jasmine Thompson stood in the boardroom of Phoenix Airways headquarters delivering a presentation to the company's senior leadership team about the new passenger advocacy program she had helped design. The same quiet dignity that had carried her through public humiliation now powered her voice as she spoke about creating protection for travelers who lacked the privilege of being the CEO's daughter. The Phoenix Passenger Protection Initiative is based on a simple principle, Jasmine explained, clicking through slides that displayed program components. Every passenger should receive the same respectful treatment regardless of their background appearance or perceived economic status. The program represented a revolutionary approach to airline customer relations. Instead of reactive complaint procedures, Phoenix Airways was implementing proactive oversight to prevent discrimination before it occurred. Jasmine had worked with Dr. Angela Martinez and civil rights experts to create monitoring systems that would identify potential bias in real time. Nathan Thompson watched his daughter present to executives with a mixture of pride and amazement. The shy engineering student who had been targeted for discrimination had emerged as a confident advocate for civil rights reform. Her transformation from victim to changemaker illustrated the power of turning personal pain into purpose. The mobile app component allows passengers to report discrimination immediately. Jasmine continued with direct escalation to our passenger rights office. But more importantly, it creates a feedback loop that helps us identify problematic patterns before they become widespread. Diana Rodriguez, the VP of Operations, raised her hand. Jasmine, how do we ensure that employees don't feel like they're being constantly monitored or suspected of bias? Jasmine's answer demonstrated the thoughtfulness that had impressed everyone who worked with her. The system focuses on education and support rather than punishment. When potential bias is detected, employees receive additional training and mentoring. The goal is to help people become better at their jobs, not to catch them making mistakes. Her approach reflected lessons learned from months of studying successful anti-bias programs in other industries. Jasmine had spent her summer break reading academic research, interviewing civil rights leaders, and visiting other companies that had implemented effective discrimination prevention programs. The transformation hadn't been easy. Jasmine had struggled with anxiety and depression following her public humiliation, requiring counseling to process the trauma of being discriminated against in front of dozens of strangers. The viral nature of the incident had made her a public figure overnight, with thousands of people offering both support and criticism of her father's response. But Jennifer Walsh, the civil rights attorney who had witnessed the original incident, had become a mentor and friend. Jennifer had helped Jasmine understand that her experience, while painful, could be transformed into a force for positive change if she chose to use it that way. The scholarship component of the initiative is particularly important, Jasmine explained, advancing to the next slide. We're providing full college scholarships to 50 minority students each year who want to pursue careers in aviation or hospitality. The goal is to increase diversity in leadership positions throughout the travel industry. The scholarship program had been Jasmine's idea, born from her recognition that lasting change required diverse voices in positions of power. Too many airlines and hotels were led by people who had never experienced discrimination and therefore couldn't effectively prevent it. Frank Kowalski, the chief security officer, asked about implementation challenges. How do we scale these programs across our entire operation without creating bureaucratic obstacles to normal customer service? We've designed the system to integrate with existing workflows. Jasmine replied confidently. Employee training includes bias awareness as part of standard customer service protocols. The monitoring systems provide real-time feedback that actually helps employees provide better service to all passengers. After the presentation, Nathan invited Jasmine to join him in his office for a private conversation. As CEO, he was immensely proud of the program his daughter had helped create. As a father, he was even prouder of the strength and character she had demonstrated in transforming her painful experience into something that would help others. "How are you really doing with all this?" Nathan asked, settling into the chair across from his daughter's. "Better than I expected," Jasmine replied honestly. "The first few weeks were really hard. Seeing my face on the news, reading comments from people who either thought I was lying or thought you went too easy on the employees involved. But working on this program has helped me understand that what happened to me happens to people every day, and most of them don't have any recourse." Nathan nodded. "I'm proud of how you've channeled your experience into advocacy for other passengers. I kept thinking about something Miss Walsh said during the incident. She pointed out that I shouldn't have had to endure that treatment just because I'm not your daughter." That made me realize that our response needed to protect all passengers, not just ones who have connections. Jasmine's insight had been crucial to developing effective reforms. Many companies implementing anti-discrimination measures focused on high-profile cases while ignoring routine mistreatment of ordinary customers. The Phoenix Passenger Protection Initiative was designed to protect everyone equally. "Have you thought about what you want to do after graduation?" Nathan asked. Jasmine smiled. "Actually, yes. I want to continue working in civil rights advocacy, but I also want to finish my aerospace engineering degree. I think there's value in understanding both the technical and social aspects of the aviation industry." Her plan reflected a sophisticated understanding of how change happened in complex organizations. Technical competence combined with moral authority created a powerful platform for advocacy that could withstand challenges from industry insiders who might dismiss purely activist approaches. "Dr. Martinez has offered me a position with the Passenger Rights Office." After graduation, Jasmine continued. "I could work there while completing a master's degree in public policy. The goal would be to become an expert in both aviation operations and civil rights law." Nathan felt a surge of admiration for his daughter's vision. She was planning a career that would position her to influence industry standards far beyond Phoenix Airways. "There's something else I want to discuss with you," Jasmine said, her tone becoming more serious. "I've been approached by civil rights organizations and other airlines who want to implement similar programs. I think there's an opportunity to create industry-wide standards for passenger treatment." The idea represented an expansion of impact that could transform air travel for millions of passengers. If Jasmine could help other airlines implement effective anti-discrimination programs, the incident that had started with her humiliation could ultimately benefit travelers across the entire industry. "What would that look like?" Nathan asked. "A certification program for airlines that meet certain standards for bias-free customer service. Passengers could choose carriers based on their commitment to equal treatment. Market forces would incentivize other airlines to improve their practices." Jasmine's proposal demonstrated the strategic thinking that had impressed everyone who worked with her. Rather than relying solely on government regulation or public pressure, she was envisioning market-based solutions that would make good passenger treatment profitable. "I want to support that initiative however I can," Nathan said. "Phoenix Airways can provide resources and share our training materials with any airline willing to implement similar programs." As they concluded their conversation, Jasmine reflected on how much her life had changed since that morning when she boarded Flight 447, expecting a routine trip home for her father's birthday. The discrimination she had experienced had been painful and traumatic, but it had also revealed strengths she didn't know she possessed. More importantly, it had shown her a purpose that extended far beyond her original career plans. Jasmine Thompson was no longer just an aerospace engineering student. She was becoming a civil rights advocate whose work would protect future generations of travelers from the discrimination she had endured. The transformation was just beginning. 1 year after the incident that had shocked the aviation industry, Samantha Rodriguez stood behind the customer service counter at an airport convenience store watching Phoenix Airways passengers board flights at Gate A-12 through the terminal's floor-to-ceiling windows. The irony wasn't lost on her that she now worked within sight of the gate where she had destroyed her career and humiliated an innocent passenger. The job paid minimum wage and offered no benefits, a dramatic fall from her position as senior flight attendant, earning $65,000 annually plus travel privileges. But more painful than the financial hardship was the daily reminder of her spectacular failure as a human being. The viral video of her tearing up Jasmine Thompson's boarding pass had been viewed over 15 million times across various social media platforms. Her name had become synonymous with airline discrimination, and a simple Google search revealed pages of news articles, commentary pieces, and social media posts analyzing her behavior and its consequences. Finding any job had been nearly impossible. The discrimination incident had made her unemployable in the airline industry, and most customer service positions required background checks that revealed her termination for discriminatory conduct. The convenience store had hired her only because the manager, a former airline employee himself, understood how quickly a career could be destroyed by poor judgment. "Ma'am, can I help you?" Samantha asked as an elderly Hispanic woman approached the counter with a bottle of water and travel-sized snacks. The customer squinted at Samantha's name tag, then looked more closely at her face. Recognition dawned slowly, followed by disgust. "You're her," the woman said quietly. "The flight attendant who attacked that young lady." Samantha felt her stomach sink. These encounters happened several times a week, each one a fresh reminder of the moment when her prejudices had overwhelmed her judgment. "Ma'am, I just want to help you with your purchase," Samantha replied, hoping to avoid another confrontation. "My granddaughter is about the same age as that girl you humiliated," the woman continued. "She's studying engineering, too. I can't imagine how I would feel if someone treated her the way you treated that young lady." The words hit Samantha like physical blows. Over the past year, she had received thousands of messages from people sharing their own experiences with discrimination, their daughters' struggles with prejudice, their anger at seeing a young woman mistreated so publicly. "I'm sorry," Samantha whispered, unable to meet the woman's eyes. The customer shook her head sadly and walked away without making her purchase, leaving Samantha alone with her guilt and the constant awareness of how many lives her actions had touched. Meanwhile, Captain James Sullivan was conducting his first flight review class at a regional aviation academy in Florida, teaching young pilots about professional ethics and decision-making under pressure. His aviation career had ended in disgrace, but he had found a new purpose in educating future pilots about the importance of moral courage in leadership positions. "Who can tell me about the most important quality for a commercial airline captain?" Sullivan asked his class of 24 students. A young woman in the front row raised her hand. "Technical competence in aircraft operations." "That's important," Sullivan replied, "but not the most important." Anyone else, a Latino student in the middle row, offered ability to make quick decisions under stress. Sullivan nodded. "Also crucial, but still not the most important quality." He walked to the whiteboard and wrote a single word: integrity. "The most important quality for any captain is moral integrity," Sullivan explained. "Technical skills can be taught. Decision-making can be developed through training. But integrity is a character trait that determines whether you'll use your authority to protect people or to harm them." Sullivan's classes always included case studies of ethical failures in aviation, including his own. He had discovered that sharing his personal story of moral failure made him a more effective teacher than any academic textbook could. "I want to tell you about the worst decision I made in 20 years of commercial aviation." He continued, knowing that this moment always made students uncomfortable, but ultimately made them better pilots. He described the incident on Flight 447 in detail, explaining how his failure to examine evidence personally had led to supporting discriminatory treatment of an innocent passenger. Students shifted uncomfortably as he recounted his role in humiliating Jasmine Thompson. "I lost my career because I chose to trust prejudice instead of examining facts," Sullivan concluded. "I backed up a crew member who was discriminating against a passenger because it was easier than doing my own investigation. That decision destroyed my life and hurt an innocent person who deserved protection, not persecution." The classroom was absolutely silent as students absorbed the lesson. Several were taking notes, understanding that they were learning from someone who had experienced the consequences of ethical failure firsthand. "The authority you'll have as commercial pilots is significant," Sullivan continued. "Passengers trust you with their safety, their dignity, and their lives. How you use that authority will determine not just your career success, but your character as human beings." After class, a young African-American woman approached Sullivan with a question that had obviously been weighing on her mind. "Captain Sullivan, how do I make sure I don't make the same mistakes you made when I become a pilot?" The question struck at the heart of Sullivan's teaching mission. Always examine evidence personally instead of accepting other people's judgments. Always consider whether your decisions protect people or put them at risk. And always remember that your passengers are human beings who deserve dignity regardless of how they look or how much money they have. The student nodded thoughtfully. Have you ever talked to the young woman who was discriminated against on your flight? Sullivan's expression grew sad. I wrote her a letter apologizing for my role in her mistreatment, but I never sent it. I decided that my apology would be more about making myself feel better than about helping her heal from the trauma I helped cause. Instead of sending personal apologies that might seem self-serving, Sullivan had chosen to dedicate his remaining career to teaching others about the importance of moral courage in aviation leadership. It was his way of honoring the dignity of the young woman he had failed to protect. The ripple effects of the Flight 447 incident had spread far beyond Phoenix Airways. The Federal Aviation Administration had implemented new passenger rights regulations requiring all airlines to establish independent discrimination oversight offices. The Department of Transportation was conducting a comprehensive review of bias in airline customer service practices. Other airlines had quietly begun implementing their own versions of Phoenix Airways anti-discrimination training programs, recognizing that public sympathy for discriminated passengers could destroy reputations and cost millions in lost revenue. The incident had also sparked congressional hearings on discrimination in the travel industry, leading to proposed legislation that would establish federal standards for equal treatment of airline passengers. But perhaps the most significant long-term consequence was cultural. The viral nature of Jasmine Thompson's experience had made discrimination more visible and therefore more costly for companies that failed to address it. Passengers were increasingly aware of their rights and more willing to document and share instances of biased treatment. The torn boarding pass that had started everything had become a symbol of how individual acts of courage could spark broad social change. Jasmine Thompson's refusal to accept injustice had created a movement that was making air travel more equitable for millions of passengers. The transformation continued to spread one flight at a time. 1 year after the incident that had shocked the aviation industry, Jasmine Thompson walked through the familiar corridors of Miami International Airport. But this time, her steps carried the confidence of someone who had transformed personal trauma into a force for positive change. She was returning to Gate A12, not as a victim, but as the newly appointed Director of Passenger Equity for Phoenix Airways, a position created specifically to institutionalize the reforms that had emerged from her experience. The terminal looked the same, but everything else had changed. Prominent displays throughout the airport showcased Phoenix Airways' passenger Bill of Rights in multiple languages. Customer service representatives wore pins indicating they had completed advanced bias awareness training. Digital monitors displayed real-time passenger satisfaction scores that included specific metrics for equal treatment across different demographic groups. As Jasmine approached Gate A12, she noticed Maria Santos, the gate supervisor who had tried to intervene during the original incident, coordinating with a diverse team of customer service agents. Maria looked up and smiled warmly as she recognized Jasmine. "Miss Thompson, welcome back. How does it feel to return to the scene of the crime?" Jasmine laughed, appreciating Maria's direct humor. "It feels like coming full circle, actually. A year ago, I was just trying to get home to see my father. Today, I'm here to make sure no other passenger goes through what I experienced." Maria nodded toward the boarding area where passengers were preparing for departure on Flight 447's current iteration, now staffed by crew members who had completed Phoenix Airways' comprehensive anti-bias training program. The difference is remarkable. Our passenger satisfaction scores for this gate are now among the highest in the Phoenix Airways system. As if summoned by their conversation, Angela Martinez, a young Latina flight attendant who had been hired as part of Phoenix Airways' diversity recruitment initiative, approached with a warm smile. "Miss Thompson, I wanted to introduce myself. I'm Angela, and I'll be working this flight. I just finished reading your case study in our training program. Your courage in standing up to discrimination has inspired all of us to be better advocates for passenger dignity." Jasmine felt a surge of emotion at the young woman's words. The training program that now included her experience as a teaching tool had been painful to develop, requiring her to relive traumatic moments in service of preventing similar incidents. But hearing how it had influenced real employees made the process worthwhile. Angela, thank you for saying that. More importantly, thank you for choosing to work for an airline that's committed to treating every passenger with respect. As they spoke, Jasmine noticed an elderly African-American man in the boarding area who seemed confused about his gate assignment. He was well-dressed but appeared uncertain about the boarding process, glancing around nervously at the bustling activity. Without hesitation, Angela excused herself and approached the gentleman with genuine concern. "Sir, can I help you find your gate or answer any questions about your flight?" The man smiled with relief. "Thank you, young lady. I don't fly very often, and I'm worried about missing my connection in Atlanta." Angela spent several minutes reviewing his itinerary, explaining the connection process and ensuring he felt confident about his travel plans. Her patient, respectful attention demonstrated exactly the kind of customer service that Phoenix Airways was working to institutionalize. Jasmine watched the interaction with satisfaction, knowing that the training programs she had helped develop were creating these positive experiences for passengers every day. The systematic changes implemented over the past year were yielding measurable results in customer satisfaction and employee performance. "Miss Thompson," a voice called from behind her. Jasmine turned to see Jennifer Walsh, the civil rights attorney who had witnessed the original incident and later became a mentor and friend. Jennifer was traveling to Atlanta for a conference on discrimination in the transportation industry, where she would present Phoenix Airways reforms as a case study in effective corporate response to bias incidents. "Jennifer, it's so good to see you. Are you flying to the conference?" "I am, and I specifically chose Phoenix Airways because I wanted to experience firsthand how the airline has changed. From what I've observed so far, the transformation has been remarkable." They walked together toward the boarding area, where Jasmine noticed something that would have been impossible. A year earlier, passengers from diverse backgrounds were being treated with identical courtesy and respect by airline staff. The passenger assessment protocols that had led to her harassment had been replaced with standardized procedures that applied equally to everyone. "The data supports your observations," Jasmine said, referring to metrics she monitored as part of her new role. "Discrimination complaints are down 93% across the Phoenix Airways system. Customer satisfaction scores among minority passengers have increased dramatically. And employee morale has improved because people feel good about working for a company that matches their values." Jennifer nodded approvingly. The business case for treating people well turns out to be pretty compelling. As Flight 447 began boarding, Jasmine observed the process with the professional eye of someone responsible for ensuring equitable treatment. She noted how crew members greeted passengers consistently, how boarding procedures were applied uniformly, and how any questions or concerns were handled with patience and respect. The transformation was particularly evident when she noticed a young black woman in casual travel clothes approaching the first-class boarding line. A year ago, such a passenger might have been subjected to suspicious scrutiny or additional questions about her ticket validity. Today, Angela Martinez greeted her with the same professional warmth she offered every passenger. "Good morning. I see you're in seat 2A today. That's a wonderful spot with a great view. Can I help you with anything as you board?" The woman smiled and thanked Angela before proceeding onto the aircraft without incident. The interaction was unremarkable in its normality, which was exactly what made it remarkable as evidence of cultural change. "That's what success looks like," Jennifer observed, having noticed the same interaction. Ordinary courtesy extended to everyone regardless of their appearance or assumptions about their economic status. Jasmine nodded, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction at witnessing the positive changes that had emerged from her painful experience. The young woman boarding Flight 447 would never know that her seamless travel experience was partially the result of reforms sparked by discrimination against another passenger in that same seat exactly 1 year earlier. As the flight departed on schedule with no incidents, no complaints, and satisfied passengers, Jasmine reflected on the journey that had brought her back to Gate A12. The torn boarding pass that had symbolized her humiliation had ultimately become the catalyst for transformation that protected countless other travelers. The girl who had been targeted for discrimination had become the woman leading the fight against it, turning personal pain into institutional change that would benefit passengers for generations to come. Standing in the airport where her advocacy had begun, Jasmine Thompson understood that her real flight was just beginning. 6 months later, Jasmine Thompson stood before a packed auditorium at the International Aviation Conference in Geneva, delivering the keynote address to airline executives from 43 countries. The same quiet strength that had carried her through public humiliation now commanded the attention of industry leaders who had come to learn how Phoenix Airways had transformed discrimination crisis into competitive advantage. They tried to tear up my ticket. Jasmine began, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed auditorium, but they couldn't tear down my dignity. And sometimes that's all it takes to change the world. The audience of airline CEOs, government officials, and passenger advocacy groups sat in absolute silence as she recounted the incident that had sparked global conversations about bias in air travel. When that boarding pass was torn in half, something broke that went far beyond a piece of paper. Trust was shattered between passengers and airlines, between employees and management, between what we promised as an industry and what we actually delivered. She clicked to her next slide, showing passenger satisfaction data from airlines that had implemented Phoenix Airways anti-discrimination protocols. But here's what we learned: fixing broken trust creates stronger relationships than never breaking it in the first place. Airlines that have implemented bias-free service protocols aren't just avoiding discrimination lawsuits. They're earning customer loyalty, improving employee morale, and increasing profitability. In the audience, Nathan Thompson watched his daughter with immense pride. The young woman who had called him for help a year and a half ago was now teaching industry leaders how to build more equitable businesses. The passenger sitting next to you might be a future CEO, a brilliant scientist, a devoted parent, or simply someone who deserves basic human dignity. Jasmine continued. You can't tell who deserves respect by looking at them. Everyone deserves respect because they're human. Her closing words would be quoted in industry publications and government reports for years to come. We have a choice as an industry. We can continue treating passengers as potential problems to be managed, or we can treat them as human beings whose dignity matters more than our assumptions. Phoenix Airways made that choice, and it changed everything. The standing ovation lasted 4 minutes. 12 airlines signed commitments to implement similar reforms before the conference ended. As Jasmine left the stage, she thought about the scared college student who had simply wanted to fly home to see her father. That girl's refusal to accept injustice had created ripples that were still spreading around the world. Later that evening, as she reviewed messages from passengers whose travel experiences had improved because of the changes sparked by her advocacy, Jasmine understood that her true destination had never been Atlanta. It had always been here, a world where every passenger could travel with dignity, where discrimination was unthinkable instead of routine, and where a torn boarding pass could become a symbol of positive change rather than personal humiliation. The flight that began with bias had landed at justice, and the journey was just beginning. If this story moved you, I want you to do 3 things right now. First, hit that like button, because stories of justice and courage deserve to be shared. Second, subscribe to this channel and ring that notification bell so you never miss our next powerful story of people standing up for what's right. And third, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, because every time we share stories of dignity triumphing over discrimination, we make the world a little bit better. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever witnessed discrimination, and did you speak up? What would you have done if you were on that flight? Your voice matters, and I want to hear from you. Remember, they can try to tear up your ticket, but they can never tear down your dignity. And sometimes, standing up with quiet courage is all it takes to change everything. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.